So I want to come to PM Modi's visit to Washington. So there are a lot of items on the agenda. I would like to ask you, what are the reasons that have prevented both the countries from successfully negotiating an FTA? And this time, do you see a willingness to negotiate an FTA?
Indeed, one could argue that both the U.S. and India have showed considerable degrees of protectionist policies at different times. Um, but I think that when you look at the situation now, clearly Trump's tariffs, or the tariffs that he's threatened to impose, are a big story here. Not just in the context of India, but in U.S. relations with many of its countries, including its closest allies and partners. And I think that what's driving all the talk about a possible FTA between the U.S. and India now is that India really does not want to be slapped with tariffs.
I would like to know your thoughts on the immigration issue as well.
But look, I think that this is going to be an unavoidable issue in the U.S.-India relationship, because of the fact that it's the undocumented Indian community here is a very large one, and this, I think it's not going to go away.
Hello everyone. Today I'm excited to welcome back Mr. Michael Kugelman. He is the South Asia Institute Director at the Wilson Center and the writer of foreign policy magazine South Asia Brief. So, Michael, once again, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Good to be back with you.
So, Michael, I would like to start by asking you about the Trump administration's importance it gives to Asia, because Trump first met with Bibi Netanyahu and he met with the Japanese PM, and now he's meeting Prime Minister Modi. Usually, US presidents meet their European allies. So, what message is the Trump administration sending out to Asia?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And indeed, I believe that Prime Minister Modi will be the fourth world leader that meets with Trump. I believe the Jordanian king is scheduled to meet with him on February 11th. And indeed, none of these four are from Europe. I mean, I wouldn't overstate this. I mean, there could be some other factors involved, but we did see that when Trump was president the first time, that there were some significant tensions with NATO partners, particularly over issues like burden sharing and that type of thing. To be honest, I think that eventually, in fact, quite soon, there will be some meetings between European leaders and Mr. Trump. But it seems to me that the general reaction from the world to Trump this time around, compared to when he became president the first time, has been a bit different. I think that we're seeing, I think, more positivity and receptivity from many countries who are keen to work with the United States, even while acknowledging the challenges that could be ahead. But no, I think that indeed, I mean, we're seeing a case of first with Israel. That's of course a top ally and a country that the Trump administration would view as critically important. And then Japan is, of course, a key treaty ally. And I think when you think of Japan, you think of the shared concern between Japan and the U.S. over China. So I think that clearly could be another reason why President Trump would want to be keen to meet with the Japanese leadership. And then, of course, with India, which I know we'll talk about, I think the China factor similarly looms large in the administration's thinking.
So I want to come to PM Modi's visit to Washington. So there are a lot of items on the agenda like trade, immigration, tariffs, and BRICS. So both sides seem to be willing to negotiate a free trade agreement this time. And I would like to ask you, what are the reasons that have prevented both the countries from successfully negotiating an FTA? And this time, do you see a willingness to negotiate an FTA?
Well, yeah, I think this is an important question. I mean, if you look at India's trade policies, how they've evolved over the years, I think we're seeing an increasingly increasing receptivity to the idea of negotiating FTAs with other countries. This was, of course, something that India was reluctant to do during the first few decades of post-colonial independence. But if you look at the last few years, we've seen some progress. Last year, India signed a free trade deal with a group of Central European countries. There's also a free trade deal with Australia, I believe, and some others coming along. So I think that we should look at the prospects for a deal with the U.S. against that broader backdrop where India is changing its position. Indeed, one could argue that both the U.S. and India have showed considerable degrees of protectionist policies at different times. Um, but I think that when you look at the situation now, clearly Trump's tariffs, or the tariffs that he's threatened to impose, are a big story here, not just in the context of India, but in U.S. relations with many of its countries, including its closest allies and partners. And I think that what's driving all the talk about a possible FTA between the U.S. and India now is that India really does not want to be slapped with tariffs, and I think it's a good sign that so far, President Trump has said nothing, or since he became president, he said nothing about slapping tariffs on India, though he did repeat an earlier threat to slap tariffs on BRICS countries if they were to opt for de-dollarization policies, which is not going to happen. Um, but I think that for India, the view is that if it can propose a negotiation with the Trump administration focused on getting to a deal that entails both countries reducing tariffs, then that would be a very good thing. So I guess I might pull back a bit and argue that maybe we're not yet ready to see, or maybe we're not about to see an FTA between the US and India, not yet. But what might be more realistic in the immediate term is something like a new economic partnership accord, which is something short of an FTA, but that could perhaps be a springboard for an FTA further down the road. I do think that the onus will be on India to make this pitch to the Trump administration that, let's talk, let's try to get to a point where we can talk about reducing our tariffs, and you could then reduce yours. And of course, with Modi meeting with Trump, obviously that's the best opportunity, that's the best person to make that pitch to President Trump. And I would just say this more broadly: we've seen the Indian government in the days since the Trump administration took office publicly signaling its receptivity to reducing tariffs, and I think part of the reason for that is to try to be preemptive, to make it less likely that the president would put India in his crosshairs, so to speak, because as we know, Trump has long viewed India as a problem country when it comes to tariffs. He's referred to it multiple times as the tariff king. That's not what you want if you're India. So I think that New Delhi so far has played this quite well. And I do think that there will be some discussions about trade issues when Modi is here, and hopefully they'll go well.
How will Quad and immigration figure on the agenda? Because you have said in your recent interviews that India is getting closer to the US, and on the other hand, India's relations with China is improving as well. So, how do you think India will play its game in the Quad, and how will the defense cooperation be? And I would like to know your thoughts on the immigration issue as well.
So you cut out a bit there, but I think I understood your question to be what to make of the how immigration and Quad issues might come up during the visit. Is that correct?
Defense as well, yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a well-known fact that Indians are the third largest undocumented group in the United States. We're talking about 725,000 people. And this is something else where there was public signaling from New Delhi in the days after Trump took office, indicating a willingness to take back some of these undocumented Indians. And as we know, there has already been a flight of a number of undocumented Indian workers that's gone back to India, and this is something that the Indian government has indicated it's willing to take on. Um, you know, quite notable that you did have a senior Indian official indicate concern about some of the conditions under which some of these undocumented workers returned. So I suspect that will be a focus point when Modi is here. I don't think that he'd want that to dominate the discussions, but I think that might be something that's carried forward. But look, I think that this is going to be an unavoidable issue in the U.S.-India relationship, because of the fact that it's the undocumented Indian community here is a very large one, and this, I think it's not going to go away. And I think if you expand the scope, when you look at other issues like visa issues, the H-1B visa issue is something that's become a bit of a flashpoint with differences in views between Trump and many of his allies and Trump supporters across the board. So this is an issue that's going to be important, just because, as we all know, Indian workers are a very large recipient of H-1B visas. That's not going to go away either. But I think because both sides want this relationship to work, I think that when Modi is here, I think that the focus will be on working together to address these issues, to address these challenges. Now, the issue of the Quad is very different. I mean, this is not controversial at all in the eyes of Washington and New Delhi, and certainly the case with Trump as well. I don't see why he would have any type of issue with the Quad. As you know, it was his first administration that really upscaled the importance of the Quad and made it into something with senior leader buy-in and so on. So, given that the Quad revolves around countering China, I don't. So I suspect that will be something that the Trump administration will be keen to maintain for sure. And one could argue that perhaps there's some aspects of multilateralism playing out around the world that the administration might not be comfortable with. But when it comes to multilateralism as embodied by the Quad, which is a group that engages in activities that very much help advance U.S. interests, I think that there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm for the Quad from this administration. And indeed, I think one key signpost to watch, maybe even during the Modi visit, is will we see talk about the next Quad leaders meeting, which is meant to be hosted by India, and maybe we'll see Prime Minister Modi inviting Trump to India this year for the Quad meeting and bilateral discussions as well. And I suspect that President Trump would accept the invitation and be keen to do it, but that'll be something to watch as well.
I want to get your thoughts on the defense cooperation, ISET in particular, because Jake Sullivan, the former NSA, visited India during the last weeks of the Biden administration as well. So, how will the tech transfer play out?
Yeah, I mean, this was, I know we've talked about this in the past. This is one of the fastest growing spaces for U.S.-India cooperation, or it had been during the Biden years. And indeed, ISET, I think, is viewed by both sides as a critical, as a milestone in the relationship, sort of akin to how the civil nuclear deal was described when it first came out. Of course, that eventually dragged and took on a bit of it became a bit of a disappointment to both sides. Though, of course, in recent weeks, we've seen indications that that's finally picking up. At any rate, yeah, ISET is critical. And I think that so long as ISET is depicted as a strategic tool meant to help, the U.S. and India work together to strengthen India's capacities to develop the capacity to be a key tech player in the world, which it already is. But I think if it's projected and depicted as something that is meant to help India become a key player in the global semiconductors industry and try to drive some of the global supply chains away from China, that type of way of describing ISET, which is very accurate, I think would very much appeal to the Trump administration. Now, one could argue that there could be some concerns about ISET based on Trump's thinking and policies. One, the issue of immigration and H-1B visas. I mean, that's something that hypothetically could impact tech cooperation if the Trump administration decides to curb the H-1B visa program, just because you have so many Indian tech workers that have benefited from that in the U.S. Also, when he was president the last time, Trump did take some positions on export controls that were pretty hard line. I think it was really China focused, but you need to have a relatively open position vis-a-vis export controls to ensure that tech transfers can take place between the U.S. and India. So that's something else. And the other key point here is, as you know, ISET, one of the things that makes ISET unique, and it's the reason why many people have such high hopes for it, is that it is meant to be directly overseen by the country's national security advisors, and that's meant to keep it from getting bottled up in the heavy bureaucracies of both countries. That means that you need the buy-in from the national security advisor in each country. Now, I'm quite sure that when Jaishankar visited Washington over the Christmas holidays here, and he met with Mike Waltz, at that point the incoming national security advisor. I'm quite sure that Jaishankar made the pitch to Waltz to the effect of, "I said is important. Let's ensure we keep it going." And I'm sure that Mr. Waltz was very receptive to it. So bottom line, I think that ISET should be in a good place. And I think so long as as Trump and certainly National Security Advisor Waltz are behind it, that it should be fine. And I suspect that'll be the case. Defense, more broadly, this gets into some very complex issues. There are a number of pending deals and sales that have been discussed for quite some time. Given that this is just going to be a working visit, not a state visit, Modi and Trump probably won't spend all that much time together. I'm not sure if they're going to be discussing the nitty gritty of these deals, though, of course, Trump is a transactional leader, and he may be keen to discuss these and see what still needs to be done to push them forward. But on the whole, when it comes to defense, given that the strategic partnership revolves around the idea of countering China, I think that this is something that the administration will support and want to advance.
I wanted to get your perspective on the energy partnership between both the countries because this has the potential to be one of the most contentious issues in the partnership because India, on one hand, is importing record amounts of energy from Russia, and on the other hand, Trump is keen to sell more US energy to India. So, how do you think this will play out?
Well, I mean, based on the public signaling from the Modi government in recent weeks, I think there's an indication from the Indian side that they don't want this to be a contentious issue. We have seen the Indian petroleum minister essentially indicate that we're open to importing more American oil, American energy. Um, and I think this is again a case of wanting to be preemptive and signaling a desire to reduce the possibility of tensions with the U.S. over issues that are important for Trump and his administration, such as buying America, so to speak. India does a lot of buying America already. I mean, we know that there's a significant level of Indian investment in the United States, which is obviously something that can help advance the relationship. But yeah, I think that I think there is a possibility that this issue will be discussed when Modi is meeting with Trump. I think that India is prepared to look into the possibility of acquiring more oil from the U.S. You go back just a few years. I think it was 2021. India was actually the top destination for American oil exports. Now, that was a different time, right? Global energy markets were very different. That was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And of course, since that happened, India has increased its imports of Russian oil because it's so cheap. And why is it going to turn down Russian oil? But I think that for India to truly be comfortable increasing its oil imports from the United States, the price point would have to be right, and that's where Trump and his administration would really have to think about how they can make that proper pitch. Now, I think that the Russia factor here is not going to loom large in ways that it had with the Biden administration, in the sense that Trump takes a much more restrained view toward Russia than the Biden administration did. So I think that for Trump, it's not necessarily that he wants India to start buying more American oil so that it can buy less Russian oil. It's more so to address the trade imbalance with India, and just because he wants countries, and especially close friends and partners, to be investing more and buying more from the United States. So I don't necessarily think that this could become a contentious issue unless India stonewalls and unless it concludes that the price that it would be looking at to buy oil from the U.S. would be prohibitive and wouldn't necessarily it wouldn't be any more advantageous than continuing to import cheap oil from Russia. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
So, how will the India Russia relationship and the Russia Ukraine war play out? Because President Trump is looking at ending the war or achieving a ceasefire. So, how will this play out?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of uncertainty here. I mean, it's very clear that one of Trump's first or his current foreign policy priorities will be seeing what he can do to help end the war in Ukraine. And obviously, that's only going to be successful if the belligerents are ready to wind things down. I'm not sure they are, but I think that the fact that Trump is trying to make a pitch to end the war, I mean, this is something that helps U.S.-India relations because I've said on a number of occasions in the past that Trump's position vis-a-vis the war in Russia, which is essentially to not criticize Russia, not criticize Putin, but simply call for the war to end. This is essentially New Delhi's position. This is Modi's position. This whole idea of it's not an era of war. This is essentially the position that Trump has taken too. So India clearly does not benefit from an ongoing war. That's very clear. Its interests are not served by a war that impacts the global economy in the ways that it does, and that enables Russia and China to move closer together, and that puts pressure on India to reduce its reliance on Russia. So, for many reasons, the war does not serve India's interests at all. So I think that this could actually help advance U.S.-India interests. I don't know if President Trump would look to Modi as a potential mediator. I mean, this has been an issue in previous months and years, given that Modi, of course, has this very special relationship with Russia, and India has a pretty good relationship with Ukraine as well. I'm not sure if that's something that Trump would look to. I suspect that he himself would want to be the one that's out there front and center, trying to be that third party mediator that brings the belligerents to a position where they'd want to wind down the war. But yeah, I think on the whole, this is something that Trump's position, his desire to end the war, is something that can help advance, or not, maybe not help advance U.S.-India interests, but it's certainly not harmful for them, just because India wants the war to end as well.
So I have one last question before coming to other topic. So how will India feel about Trump's dealing with Iran? Because this is less discussed. India has significant interests in Iran because of the Chabahar port, and it is looking to resume its energy import from Iran. So will India welcome Trump's desire to strike a deal with Iran?
Yeah, this is a critical point. I'm glad you brought this up, and you're right that this isn't discussed as much. I mean, we talk about various issues that could cause challenges for U.S.-India relations. We don't talk enough about Iran. So, as you know, India has drastically decreased its oil imports from Iran in recent years. It hardly imports any energy from Iran, and it's ramped up its energy ties with the Saudis and other countries in the Gulf besides Iran. Um, but I would actually look to the Chabahar issue. India has recently signaled its desire to double down on its cooperation with Iran to develop the port in Chabahar, because that's meant to advance India's broader trade and connectivity goals, as it wants to facilitate better access to Central Asia via Iran and via Afghanistan. It doesn't really have a direct land route to access Central Asia, because Pakistan doesn't let it do that. It doesn't give India transit trade rights. So Chabahar is important. And if you look at how India in recent weeks has started to scale up its relations with the Taliban, that's all part of the same thing. I mean, India wants to enhance ties with Taliban-led Afghanistan, to make it easier to facilitate access trade links to Central Asia via Iran and Afghanistan. And so I think that the Trump administration's maximum pressure policy on Iran could be problematic for India. There was an executive order, I believe, that came out vis-a-vis U.S. policy on Iran, and it essentially said there's not going to be any sanctions waivers when it comes to countries dealing with Iran, and I think that would include Chabahar. So India is not going to get the relief, the sanctions relief that it has. Sorry, it's not going to get the sanctions waiver that it has previously. But India really wants to push forward on Chabahar, and indeed, if it wants to try to increase energy imports from Iran, it's not going to get very far on that. So this might be an issue that comes up during the Trump Modi meeting. Again, I think both sides would want to keep the focus on the positives, but this is an important issue for both sides. And so that said, if Trump does want to push towards a deal with Iran, certainly that's something that India would want to see, as that would, I think, clearly take the pressure off, so to speak. If U.S. ties with Iran do somehow manage to improve, less likely that India would face pressure for its desire to engage with Iran. But I'm a bit skeptical. Trump has taken a very unconventional approach to traditional U.S. allies and partners, right? I mean, he met with the North Korean leader. He takes a fairly modest position toward Putin. And he's always professed his admiration for China's President Xi, and has said he wants to work with China to promote peace in the world. But with Iran, it's always been a very hostile, critical policy. So I think it would take a lot to get to an actual deal between the U.S. and Iran. And quite frankly, I don't see how Iran would be interested in any type of deal with the U.S., though it depends what type of leverage and pressure the Trump administration brings to bear.